Serena Bennett was halfway across the Bellini garden when she realized a man was about to collapse in the dirt. Nobody else seemed particularly concerned. That was impressive, considering there were nearly 60 people standing close enough to watch it happen. The afternoon party had taken over the entire rear garden of Bellini estate. Champagne moved faster than water. Women in elegant dresses gathered beneath enormous white umbrellas. Men in expensive suits discussed money as though they had personally invented it. Waiters circulated with silver trays, and somewhere near the pool, a woman had spent almost 5 minutes explaining why the temperature of her sparkling water was unacceptable. 20 yards away, men were working beneath the July sun. Apparently, their temperature was less important. Serena stopped beside one of the tables. Her attention had settled on a gardener near the unfinished flower beds. He was sitting in the dirt, not resting. There was a difference. One forearm was braced across his raised knee. His head was lowered. Sweat had soaked through the back of his brown work shirt, and dirt covered his trousers from the knees down. Dark hair clung damply to his forehead. He looked exhausted. He also looked... Serena frowned. Far too large for the tiny gardening shovel lying beside him. That thing looked ridiculous next to his hand. But this was hardly the moment to critique gardening equipment. The man lifted his head. For one strange second, their eyes met across the lawn. Serena expected him to look away. He didn't. There was something unsettling about his stare. Not threatening exactly, just observant. Too observant. The other gardeners kept their heads down whenever one of the suited men walked past. This one watched everybody. The guests, the guards, the staff, the cars arriving through the eastern gate. Even the security cameras. Then his eyes returned to Serena. She looked down at the cold glass of water in her hand, back at him, then toward the champagne table. There were at least 30 untouched bottles sitting in buckets of ice. Surely civilization could survive the loss of one glass of water. Serena crossed the lawn. Several people noticed. That was apparently more interesting than noticing the man slowly cooking beside the roses. Serena stepped over the low border surrounding the flower bed, gathered the skirt of her pale floral dress slightly, and crouched beside him. Up close, he looked worse. There was dirt across his jaw. His hands were scraped. Sweat ran along his temple, but his eyes, those were completely awake, dark, sharp, almost annoyingly calm for a man who looked 1 degree away from becoming part of the landscaping. Serena extended the glass. The gardener stared at it, then at her. He didn't take it. Serena waited. Nothing. Apparently dehydration had come with trust issues. She pushed the glass slightly closer. Still nothing. Serena finally told him that unless he had developed a personal objection to water, drinking it would probably be wise. Something changed in his face. Barely. The beginning of amusement. Then he took the glass. His fingers brushed hers. Rough. Warm. Far too warm. Serena's concern deepened. The man drank slowly, not greedily. That was the first strange thing. A genuinely exhausted gardener should have emptied the glass in seconds. This man drank with controlled restraint, as though even dehydration required discipline. Serena watched him finish half. Then she glanced toward the shallow trench behind him. He had apparently been helping dig new irrigation channels around the flower beds. She looked back at him. There was no delicate way to say it. If he intended to continue digging in this heat without drinking anything, somebody was eventually going to plant flowers over him. That did it. The corner of his mouth moved. A real reaction this time. Small, but definitely there. Serena smiled despite herself. At least the gardener wasn't completely miserable. Then a man's voice carried across the lawn. Serena turned. Victor Hale, the estate manager, was walking toward them, and Victor looked furious. Not concerned about the gardener. Of course not. Concern would have ruined his reputation. He was staring at Serena, specifically at the glass in the gardener's hand. Victor had spent the entire morning behaving as though the Bellini garden party were a diplomatic summit, rather than a gathering of wealthy people eating tiny food beneath umbrellas. Everything had to be perfect. The tables, the flowers, the staff. Apparently, perfection now included making certain gardeners remained properly dehydrated. Victor demanded to know what Serena was doing. Serena rose slowly. She explained the situation in the simplest possible terms. The man was thirsty. She had water. A crisis had been narrowly avoided. Victor did not appreciate the explanation. Behind him, several guests had begun watching. Wonderful. Nothing improved an afternoon like becoming entertainment for rich strangers. Victor lowered his voice and reminded Serena that the grounds crew had their own break area. Serena looked toward it. It was almost 100 yards away. Then she looked at the gardener, then at Victor. The expression on her face apparently completed the argument without requiring words. Victor's jaw tightened. He ordered the gardener back to work. The gardener remained seated. Victor repeated himself. Still nothing. Serena slowly turned toward the man. Now she was curious. Most employees became extremely interested in obedience whenever Victor Hale raised his voice. This gardener looked bored. Not rebellious, not frightened. Bored. Victor noticed too. His face darkened. The gardener finally stood. And that was when Serena discovered the second strange thing about him. He was enormous. Not absurdly so, but tall, broad-shouldered, and built with the kind of solid weight that made Serena instinctively move half a step backward when he straightened to his full height. Victor had to look up. He clearly disliked that. The gardener handed Serena the empty glass. His eyes remained on hers for another second. Then he thanked her. 2 words. Low voice. Calm. Surprisingly polished. Serena's eyebrows pulled together. That accent didn't belong to a man Victor had supposedly hired from a local landscaping crew. Before she could think about it, the gardener picked up his shovel and returned to work. Victor followed Serena back toward the party, muttering about boundaries. Serena ignored most of it. She looked over her shoulder once. The gardener was digging again, but he wasn't looking at the ground. He was looking at Victor, and for the first time, Serena felt something cold move beneath the humor of the afternoon, because there was no gratitude in that stare, no embarrassment, no fear. There was recognition, and something much worse, judgment. Serena turned back toward the party. She had absolutely no idea that the thirsty gardener behind her had been watching Victor Hale for 3 days. She didn't know that $3 million had disappeared from Bellini-controlled companies during the previous 6 months. She didn't know that someone inside the estate was feeding information to an enemy. And she certainly didn't know that the man digging beside the roses had deliberately covered himself in dirt that morning so nobody would recognize him. His name was Enzo Bellini. The mansion belonged to him. The garden belonged to him. Half the men drinking champagne 30 yards away either worked for him, owed him, or were terrified of him. And Serena Bennett had just become the only person at his own party who had offered him a glass of water. Enzo drove the shovel into the earth again. Then he watched Victor Hale disappear into the crowd. 3 days undercover had already taught Enzo plenty about the people surrounding him. But Serena had just made herself interesting, and Enzo Bellini had learned a long time ago that interesting things inside his world rarely stayed innocent for very long. 3 days earlier, Enzo Bellini had entered his own estate through the servants' gate. That alone would have given his grandmother heart failure. The clothes might have finished the job: old work boots, faded trousers, a brown shirt that had been deliberately washed until the fabric lost whatever dignity it once possessed. A cheap cap, no watch, no Bellini ring, no armored SUV, and, most importantly, no procession of armed men announcing that one of Chicago's most dangerous men had arrived home. Enzo had spent 37 years becoming difficult to overlook. For the next few days, he intended to become invisible. The reason was sitting somewhere inside his mansion. $3 million had disappeared through a chain of Bellini-owned construction companies. On paper, nothing looked particularly dramatic. A landscaping invoice here, equipment purchases there, contractor fees, maintenance costs, all legitimate enough to survive a casual inspection. Unfortunately for whoever had designed the scheme, Enzo Bellini did not do casual inspections. One invoice had bothered him, then another. By the time his accountant discovered that several companies receiving Bellini money shared the same hidden ownership, Enzo knew somebody close to him was stealing. The obvious solution would have been interrogation. Enzo had men who considered interrogation an art form. Marco Bellini, his cousin and second-in-command, had suggested something slightly more civilized involving accountants, locked offices, and several unpleasant conversations. Enzo rejected both. If he arrived as himself, everyone would behave. That was the problem. People became remarkably decent when they knew Enzo Bellini was watching. He wanted to know who they were when they believed he wasn't. So the most feared man associated with Bellini estate became part of the temporary landscaping crew preparing the grounds for a charity garden party. Marco had objected, not to the danger, to the gardening. He had looked at Enzo's hands and pointed out that the last plant Enzo personally owned had survived 11 days. Enzo had reminded him the plant had been defective. Marco had wisely ended the conversation. The disguise worked better than expected. Nobody looked twice at gardeners. That was Enzo's first discovery. His second was considerably uglier. People said extraordinary things in front of men they considered invisible. Businessmen discussed bribes while Enzo trimmed hedges 6 feet away. Guests complained about employees within their hearing. Victor Hale insulted workers, reduced breaks, pocketed supplier discounts, and spent suspicious amounts of time receiving calls near the Eastern Service Gate. Enzo watched everything. He remembered everything. And he waited. Then Serena Bennett walked into the garden. He noticed her before she noticed him. That annoyed him slightly. Enzo preferred seeing things first. Serena had arrived carrying 2 boxes of place cards against her chest while attempting to push open a glass door with one hip. The door won, for approximately 3 seconds. Then a waiter helped her. Serena thanked him, stepped outside, and nearly collided with an ornamental tree. She stopped, looked at the tree, then moved around it, with the offended dignity of a woman convinced the tree had acted deliberately. Enzo almost smiled. Almost. She was beautiful. That registered immediately. Curvy in a pale floral dress that followed the softness of her figure without attempting to hide it. Dark hair swept back loosely. Warm face. Full mouth. The kind of woman people noticed. Except, strangely, the people around Serena mostly noticed her when they needed something. A guest handed her an empty glass. Without asking whether she worked there, she took it anyway. A coordinator called her from across the lawn. Someone else asked her to fix seating cards. Within 10 minutes, Serena had solved 3 problems she hadn't created. Enzo began wondering exactly what her job was. The answer appeared to be everything. Serena worked for the event company, hired to coordinate the party, but Victor treated her as though the Bellinis had purchased her, along with the champagne. She handled guests, staff, flowers, a broken table arrangement, a missing delivery, and one deeply offended elderly woman whose chair had apparently been positioned at an angle personally designed to disrespect her. Serena moved the chair 2 inches. The woman became happy. Enzo decided diplomacy was stranger than organized crime. By midday, the temperature climbed. The temporary grounds crew had been told to finish the irrigation trench before evening. Victor reduced their break. Enzo said nothing. He wanted to see how far Victor would go. That was how he ended up sitting in the dirt when Serena approached with the water. He wasn't actually about to collapse. Exhausted, yes. Thirsty, absolutely. Enzo had spent years inside gyms, boxing rooms, and worse places than gardens. The sun wasn't going to kill him. But Serena didn't know that. That was what mattered. She had looked across a lawn filled with people, more important than a gardener, and chosen the gardener. After she walked away, Enzo found himself staring at the empty glass longer than necessary. One of the older workers beside him noticed. The man's name was Frank, 62, 3 grandchildren, terrible knees, absolutely no understanding of when silence was appropriate. Frank glanced toward Serena and informed Enzo that she was pretty. Enzo returned to digging. Frank took that as encouragement. He added that she seemed single. Enzo stopped. Slowly. Frank suddenly became fascinated by irrigation. Smart man. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly until Enzo noticed Victor disappearing behind the maintenance building. Enzo followed at a distance. Victor made a phone call. He spoke too softly for Enzo to hear everything. But one sentence reached him. Tomorrow night. East Gate. No cameras. That was enough. Enzo returned to the flower bed before Victor came back. Serena was there again. This time, she carried an entire pitcher. She began pouring water for the grounds crew. Victor had apparently failed to frighten her. Enzo watched her move from man to man. No performance. No expectation. When she reached him, she poured the last glass. Enzo asked whether she planned to get herself fired over gardeners. Serena looked toward Victor. Then back at him. She said she had been fired from better places. Enzo laughed before he could stop himself. Serena stared. Apparently she had not expected the gardener to possess teeth. Then she smiled, and something inconvenient happened inside Enzo's chest. Nothing dramatic. Nothing he intended to investigate. Just interest. Serena left. Frank looked at Enzo. Enzo warned him without speaking. Frank nodded. The man was learning. That evening, the party ended. Guests departed. Workers cleared tables. Serena stayed. Enzo noticed, because almost everyone else from the event company had left by 9. She remained in the garden, collecting forgotten glasses. Enzo was crossing behind the maintenance shed when he saw Victor approach her. He couldn't hear the beginning. He heard the end. Victor was angry about the water. Serena was apparently unimpressed. Then Victor said something that changed her expression. Enzo moved closer. Victor had accused Serena of trying to attract attention, specifically male attention. Apparently kneeling beside a sweaty gardener with a glass of water had been an elaborate seduction strategy. Enzo looked down at his dirt-covered clothes. If this was seduction, Serena had chosen an unnecessarily difficult route. Her response was quiet. She told Victor that compassion was not flirting. Victor stepped closer, too close. Enzo's body reacted before his judgment did. One step, then another. He stopped himself. Not yet. Serena handled it. She moved around Victor, picked up the tray, and walked away. Victor watched her. The expression on his face bothered Enzo. Not anger. Calculation. Enzo waited until Serena disappeared inside. Then he looked at Victor. Victor never noticed. That was his mistake. Later that night, Enzo met Marco inside an unused storage building beyond the West Garden. Marco arrived in a suit. Enzo looked at him. Marco looked at the mud covering Enzo. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Marco handed him a folder. Victor Hale's finances were worse than expected. Large cash deposits, unexplained property, connections to a Bellini rival named Adrian Russo. Enzo opened the file, and there it was, a photograph. Victor, entering a restaurant with one of Russo's men. The betrayal had a face now, but Enzo wasn't finished. He wanted the entire network, every account, every accomplice. Every person who had mistaken Bellini's silence for Bellini weakness. Marco started to leave, then paused. He mentioned the woman. Enzo's eyes lifted. Marco had seen Serena giving him water through the security feed. Apparently the guards monitoring Enzo had enjoyed that immensely. Enzo told him to find better guards. Marco said nothing. His expression did. Enzo returned to the mansion long after midnight, through a private entrance. Nobody on the temporary staff knew existed. He showered, changed, spent 2 hours reviewing accounts. Then, just before 3 in the morning, he stopped. On his desk sat a bottle of water. Enzo stared at it. For some ridiculous reason, he thought of Serena. Across the estate, Serena was still awake too. Not because of Enzo. At least, that was what she told herself. She was thinking about the gardener's voice, his hands, the way Victor had shouted at him, the way the man had looked completely unafraid, and the strange certainty she had felt when he stood. Serena had spent enough time around powerful men to recognize arrogance. The gardener didn't have arrogance. He had authority. There was a difference. And Serena Bennett had just become curious enough to make a very bad decision. The following morning, she started watching him back. By 10 the next morning, Serena had reached a conclusion. The gardener was terrible at being a gardener. Not because he couldn't work. The man could dig, apparently with enough determination to reach another continent. The problem was everything else. He didn't know the names of half the flowers. He held pruning shears like they had personally offended him, and when Serena asked whether the hydrangeas needed more shade, he stared at them with the expression of a man being asked to identify a distant relative at a funeral. Suspicious. Very suspicious. Serena began testing him. Nothing serious. Just questions. Roses, soil, fertilizer. Each answer made things worse. At one point, Enzo suggested asking Frank. Serena folded her arms. A gardener referring gardening questions to another gardener was hardly a compelling defense. Enzo asked why she cared. Serena told him she disliked mysteries. That was a lie. Serena loved mysteries. She simply preferred mysteries that did not have broad shoulders and unsettling eyes. Enzo returned to work. Serena stayed. He finally asked whether she had anything useful to do. Serena looked toward the mansion. Probably. She remained exactly where she was. Enzo almost smiled. Their strange little routine began there. Serena brought water. Enzo pretended this was unnecessary. She brought it anyway. He occasionally made dry observations that caught her off guard. She responded. Sometimes Frank listened from nearby, with the delighted expression of a man receiving free entertainment during working hours. Enzo began learning Serena in pieces. She hated olives, loved old crime novels, had a habit of talking to herself when irritated, could organize 200 guests without raising her voice, but somehow misplaced her phone at least 4 times every day. She was also sharper than people realized. Enzo watched wealthy guests underestimate her, repeatedly. Serena allowed it, until allowing it stopped being useful. Then she could reduce a grown man to silence with 1 sentence and a pleasant smile. Enzo admired efficiency. Serena had plenty. What she didn't have was patience for cruelty. That became obvious when a young waiter dropped an entire tray of champagne. Victor exploded. The boy couldn't have been more than 19. His face went pale. Guests turned. Serena stepped between them. She didn't shout. She simply began helping pick up the glasses while calmly informing Victor that humiliating the waiter would not magically return champagne to the glasses. A woman nearby laughed. Victor didn't. Enzo did. Quietly. Serena heard him. She pointed at him from across the lawn as though he were somehow responsible. Enzo immediately looked down at the flower bed. Frank nearly injured himself trying not to laugh. For the first time in months, Enzo was enjoying himself. That concerned him. He wasn't there to enjoy anything. He was there because someone had betrayed him, so he forced his attention back toward Victor. That afternoon, Victor met a delivery van at the eastern gate. Enzo followed. Serena followed Enzo. Neither knew about the other, until Enzo turned behind a hedge and nearly walked directly into her. He stopped. Serena stopped. For several seconds, they simply stared at each other. Then Enzo asked what she was doing. Serena could have asked him exactly the same thing. She did. Neither answered. Excellent progress. Enzo moved. Serena blocked him. That surprised him. Most people did not block Enzo Bellini. Those who did usually had significantly more weapons. Serena had a clipboard. Apparently she considered it sufficient. She wanted to know why a gardener had spent the last 20 minutes following the estate manager. Enzo asked why an event coordinator had spent 20 minutes following a gardener who was following the estate manager. Serena considered that. Annoyingly fair. Then voices sounded beyond the hedge. Enzo reacted instantly. His hand closed around Serena's wrist. He pulled her behind the thick greenery. Serena nearly protested. Then Victor appeared on the other side. Another man was with him. Serena recognized neither. Enzo recognized both. One worked for Adrian Russo. The conversation lasted less than a minute. A package changed hands. Victor walked away. Serena looked at Enzo. Enzo looked at Serena. The humor was gone. She had seen too much. He told her to forget it. Serena's eyebrows rose. Forget the suspicious exchange she had just witnessed behind a hedge. Of course. She would schedule that immediately after lunch. Enzo closed his eyes briefly. The woman was going to become a problem. Worse, he was beginning to like the problem. He told her Victor was dangerous. That got her attention. Serena asked how he knew. Enzo gave no answer. There it was again. That wall. Serena studied him. Then her gaze dropped to his hands. Not Gardner's hands. Yes, they were dirty. Calloused. Scarred. But one scar ran across the base of his thumb in a way Serena had seen before. Her father had served in the military. She knew what repeated weapons training could do to hands. Serena looked back at Enzo. He noticed where she had been staring. Something passed between them. Neither mentioned it. That evening, Serena went searching for Victor's event paperwork. She found something else. A restricted office door, slightly open. Inside, the gardener was standing behind Victor Hale's desk. No shovel, no cap, no harmless expression. He was reading financial documents. Serena froze. Enzo slowly lifted his head. There were moments when Serena's common sense functioned beautifully. This was not one of them. Instead of leaving, she stepped inside. Enzo stared at her. Serena stared back. The first question was obvious. Was he stealing? Enzo almost looked offended. Apparently theft was beneath the mysterious gardener who had broken into a locked office. Serena lowered her voice. He told her to leave. She refused. Enzo walked toward her. Serena's heart accelerated. Not because she thought he would hurt her, because suddenly he didn't look like the man she had been teasing beside the roses. His entire posture had changed. The easy roughness disappeared. Every movement became controlled. Predatory. He stopped in front of her. Serena swallowed, then ruined the tension by asking whether gardening had become so badly paid that he'd moved into accounting. Enzo stared, then laughed, quietly, almost helplessly. Serena smiled. There he was. For a moment, then footsteps sounded outside. Enzo's expression changed. He pulled Serena behind the office door seconds before Victor entered the corridor. They stood pressed into the narrow space, too close. Serena became painfully aware of Enzo's chest against her shoulder. His hand rested beside her head. His breathing was completely steady. Hers had apparently resigned. Victor stopped outside. The handle moved. Serena's eyes widened. Enzo didn't move. The handle stopped. Victor's phone rang. He walked away. Only then did Serena breathe. Enzo looked down at her. She looked up. Neither moved immediately. That was new. Then Serena stepped away. She told him she wanted the truth. Enzo couldn't give it. Not yet. He gave her something else. A warning. Stay away from Victor. Serena asked whether he intended to stay away from Victor. Enzo said no. Serena nodded. Then neither was she. Enzo watched her leave. For a man who controlled hundreds of people, he had absolutely no idea what to do with Serena Bennett. And things were about to get worse. Because the documents on Victor's desk had revealed something Enzo hadn't expected. The missing money wasn't leaving Bellini territory. It was buying weapons. Someone wasn't merely stealing from Enzo. Someone was preparing for a war. Serena spent the next 2 days pretending nothing had changed. She was terrible at it. Every time she saw Enzo, questions multiplied. Why did he know which doors had alarms? Why had she once seen a security guard begin to address him, stop halfway through a word, and suddenly become extremely interested in his shoes? Why did Enzo know that one of the cameras near the eastern wall had a blind spot? And why, when a delivery truck nearly backed into Serena, had Enzo crossed 15 feet so quickly that she barely saw him move? He pulled her out of the way. 1 second, she was standing beside the truck. The next, she was against his chest, again. Serena was beginning to suspect Enzo Bellini's landscaping operation involved unusually aggressive employee training. Except, she still didn't know his surname. To her, he was simply Enzo. He had finally given her that much. She had given him Serena. A deeply uneven exchange, considering he already knew everything about her. Enzo's people had run a background check the night after she gave him water. Serena Bennett, 29, event coordinator. No criminal history, no suspicious connections. Raised by her father after her mother died young. Father deceased, one former fiancé who had apparently believed criticism counted as affection. Enzo disliked him immediately. That was irrational. Enzo accepted this. Serena didn't need protecting from a man no longer in her life. But Enzo remembered the small things. The way she became quieter after certain comments. How she sometimes tugged at her dress after someone looked too long. How she moved toward the edge of group photographs, despite being perfectly comfortable taking charge everywhere else. Someone had taught Serena to question the space she occupied. Enzo wanted to know who. Then he reminded himself that he was investigating treason, not Serena Bennett's emotional history. His priorities had become embarrassing. Victor's scheme moved faster. Enzo discovered 2 Bellini security men had been compromised. A warehouse manager was involved. Money had purchased weapons. And Adrian Russo intended to use the upcoming foundation dinner at Bellini Estate to strike. Enzo could have ended everything immediately. Instead, he needed the final name. Someone above Victor. Someone with access to private Bellini schedules. Someone close. Then Serena accidentally found the clue. She was reorganizing guest files when she noticed duplicate delivery credentials. One belonged to a florist. The second had the same vehicle registration under a different company. Serena mentioned it casually to Enzo. He became very still. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Serena had developed an alarming talent for noticing Enzo. He asked to see the paperwork. She held it away. No. Enzo stared. Serena wanted an explanation first. He stepped closer. She stepped back. He kept coming, until Serena's back touched the edge of a table. Then Enzo reached past her, and picked up the second copy she had forgotten was lying there. Serena stared at him. Enzo looked at the paper, then at her. A tiny smile appeared. Serena informed him she disliked him. Enzo seemed unusually comfortable with that. The duplicate registration led to a warehouse connected to Russo. Finally, the pieces were moving together. That night, Enzo slipped off the estate to meet Marco. Serena saw him leave. Naturally, she followed. Enzo discovered her halfway down the service road. He was not pleased. Serena pointed out that mysterious gardeners leaving private Mafia estates at midnight rarely inspired sensible behavior. Enzo asked whether she had considered staying in bed. She had. Briefly. It had sounded boring. Before Enzo could respond, headlights appeared. A vehicle came around the corner too quickly. Enzo grabbed Serena and pulled her behind a stone wall. The vehicle slowed. Men inside scanned the road. Then continued. Serena looked at Enzo. This wasn't funny anymore. He told her to go back. She finally listened. That frightened Enzo more than her arguing would have. The next morning, Serena avoided him. He noticed immediately. No water, no unnecessary gardening questions, no sarcastic commentary. Nothing. By noon, Enzo was irritated. By 2, Frank had noticed. By 3, Frank asked whether Enzo had upset his girlfriend. Enzo nearly broke a shovel. Frank stopped asking questions. Serena wasn't angry. She was frightened. Not of Enzo. For him. Whatever he had gotten himself involved with was serious. And she had begun caring whether he survived it. That realization was deeply inconvenient. Late that afternoon, she found him behind the greenhouse. Blood stained his sleeve. Serena's stomach dropped. Enzo had intercepted one of Victor's men searching the maintenance room. The confrontation had been brief. A knife had caught his upper arm. The other man had fared considerably worse. Serena knew none of that. She only saw blood. She dragged Enzo into an empty utility room before anyone noticed. He objected. Serena ignored him. She found a first aid kit. Then ordered him to sit. Enzo Bellini had ignored judges, politicians, police commissioners, and men pointing guns at him. He sat. That realization would have disturbed him if Serena hadn't been unbuttoning the top of his shirt to reach the injury. Then he had different problems. Serena cleaned the wound. Enzo watched her. She tried not to watch him. This became difficult. The shirt had to move farther from his shoulder. Serena discovered the gardener possessed several scars no gardening accident could reasonably explain. One near his ribs, another across his shoulder, a pale mark along his side. She stopped. Enzo knew the question was coming. It didn't. Serena simply continued cleaning the cut. That affected him more. She wasn't demanding, wasn't prying. She was worried. When she finished, Serena told him that whatever he was doing, it wasn't worth dying for. Enzo looked at her. For the first time, he almost told her everything. His name, the estate, Victor, Russo, all of it. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Marco. They had the final connection. Victor's partner was inside Enzo's personal security operation, Daniel Voss, a man Enzo had trusted for 9 years. The betrayal landed harder than expected. Enzo stood. Serena saw his expression change. He became someone else again, cold, distant, dangerous. She asked what happened. Enzo couldn't answer. He only told her to leave the estate tomorrow morning. Serena stared. He repeated it. This time, she became angry. He didn't get to appear in her life, covered in mysteries, let her patch stab wounds, follow criminals around hedges, and then suddenly order her away, as though she were a misplaced flower arrangement. Enzo's mouth almost moved. Serena wasn't finished. She told him if he wanted her gone, he could at least explain why. Enzo couldn't, because the truth would place her deeper inside his world. He walked away. Serena watched him go, and for the first time since meeting him, she wished she had never given the gardener that glass of water, not because she regretted helping him, because she had started caring about what happened after he drank it. That night, someone entered Serena's room. She wasn't there. She had gone downstairs for tea. When she returned, nothing looked disturbed, except her phone. It had moved, barely. Serena picked it up. A photograph was open on the screen. A photograph she had taken 2 days earlier. Enzo working in the garden. Someone had enlarged his face. Underneath it was a message from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. Serena stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. The gardener won't be able to save you. Serena's blood went cold, because whoever sent it knew exactly what she had been doing. And somewhere else inside Bellini estate, Enzo Bellini received a photograph too. Serena, standing alone outside the greenhouse. One sentence beneath it. We found your weakness. Enzo stared at the photograph. Then very slowly, the man Serena knew as the gardener disappeared. The following morning, Bellini estate looked beautiful. That was unfortunate, because underneath the flowers, polished windows, and white tablecloths, the place was preparing to explode. The foundation dinner would begin at 6. 200 guests, politicians, business owners, donors. Several men with criminal connections polite society preferred not to acknowledge. Victor believed everything was proceeding according to plan. Daniel Voss believed Enzo was still outside the estate. Adrian Russo believed Bellini security had been compromised. All three men were wrong. Enzo was 20 yards away, cutting roses. Badly. Frank watched him destroy one stem, then another. Finally, the older gardener took the shears away. Enzo allowed it. There were more important things happening. Serena arrived. She hadn't left. Of course she hadn't. Enzo stared at her across the lawn. Serena stared back. She lifted one eyebrow. Enzo closed his eyes briefly. He should have known. He crossed toward her. Serena was already speaking before he arrived. She told him about the message. Every trace of irritation left his face. He took her phone. Read it. Then asked whether anyone had touched her. Serena said no. His jaw tightened anyway. He told her to remain inside near the main staff. Serena agreed, too quickly. Enzo looked at her. Serena looked innocent. It was not convincing. By 6, guests filled the garden. Serena worked. Enzo disappeared among the grounds crew. Marco's loyal men were already positioned around the estate, disguised as drivers, servers, and private security. The trap was ready. Then, Victor changed the plan. He accused Serena of stealing confidential guest information, publicly, in front of half the staff. Serena stared at the documents Victor produced. They had been found inside her bag. She had never seen them. Victor knew that. Enzo watched from across the lawn. Every instinct told him to move. He waited. Victor needed to expose himself. Serena defended herself calmly. Victor became louder. Guests noticed. That was intentional. He wanted Serena removed through the Eastern Service entrance, exactly where Russo's men were waiting. Enzo understood. So did Serena. She looked toward him. One glance. That was all. Victor grabbed Serena's arm. Enzo moved. No rush. No shouting. He simply crossed the lawn. Something about the way he approached made conversations begin dying around them. Victor saw him. His face twisted. The gardener. Of all people. He ordered Enzo away. Enzo kept walking. Victor tightened his grip on Serena. Enzo stopped directly in front of him, then told Victor to remove his hand, quietly. Victor laughed. Several guests turned. Serena looked at Enzo. There was nothing humorous in his face now. Victor told him he had forgotten his place. That sentence changed everything. Enzo looked at Victor's hand around Serena's arm, then back at Victor, and Serena saw it happen. The gardener straightened. Not physically, something deeper. The slight roughness disappeared from his posture. His shoulders settled. His chin lifted. His eyes became colder. Suddenly, the dirty work shirt looked like a costume. Victor didn't notice quickly enough. He ordered 2 security men to remove him. Neither moved. Victor shouted again. Still nothing. Then one of the men near the mansion entrance touched his earpiece. The main gates opened. Black vehicles entered. 1, 2, 4, 6. Guests began turning. Men stepped from the vehicles. Dark suits. Weapons concealed badly enough that nobody mistook them for accountants. Marco came first. He crossed the lawn. Victor looked confused. Serena looked between Marco and Enzo. Marco stopped in front of the gardener and lowered his head. Not dramatically. Just enough. Respect. Recognition. Then he spoke one word. Boss. The garden went silent. Serena stared at Enzo. Her brain rejected the information. Boss? Boss of what? Then she looked at the mansion. The guards. The Bellini crest carved into the stone fountain. Back at Enzo. Oh. Victor stepped backward. Color disappeared from his face. Enzo removed his gardening gloves, slowly, dropped them onto a table. Then he looked around at the guests who had spent 4 days walking past him. Men who had complained about his muddy boots. Women who had ordered him to move flower pots. One particularly unfortunate guest had given Enzo $5 and instructed him to clean bird droppings from a Bentley. Enzo's eyes briefly found the man. The man looked ready to become religious. Serena might have laughed if she weren't busy discovering she had spent 4 days ordering Enzo Bellini to drink more water. The name alone carried weight. Even Serena knew it. Enzo Bellini, the Bellini family. The man people discussed quietly. The man Victor had spent the entire week pretending to prepare the estate for. The man Serena assumed was somewhere in New York. The man who apparently had been digging beside her hydrangeas. Enzo looked at Victor, then Daniel Voss. His voice changed. Not louder. It didn't need to be. He explained that $3 million had been stolen, weapons purchased, security schedules sold, an attack planned. Victor tried speaking. Enzo stopped him with a look. Marco placed documents on the table. Accounts, photographs, transfers, everything. Daniel ran. He made it 6 steps. Bellini men stopped him. Guests backed away. The entire glamorous party had become a courtroom, and the gardener was apparently judge, jury, and property owner. Victor's attention moved desperately toward Serena. Then he made the worst decision available to him. He grabbed her. Enzo's expression became absolutely still. Victor pulled Serena against him and reached inside his jacket. He never finished. Serena drove her heel into his foot. Victor cursed. His grip loosened. Enzo crossed the distance. Fast. What followed took seconds. Victor hit the ground. The weapon slid across the grass. Bellini men surrounded him. Serena stood frozen. Enzo turned immediately toward her. His hands reached for her arms, then stopped. He remembered himself, remembered what she now knew. Serena saw it. For the first time since meeting him, Enzo Bellini looked uncertain. She looked at the dirt on his shirt, then at the armed men waiting for his orders, then back at him. There were approximately 1,000 sensible things Serena could have said. She chose none of them. She asked whether he had ever actually worked as a gardener. Marco looked away. Enzo stared at her, then admitted, no. Serena nodded slowly. That explained the hydrangeas. A sound escaped Marco, possibly a cough, possibly the final remains of his professionalism. Enzo almost smiled. Almost. Then gunfire erupted beyond the eastern wall. Russo's men had arrived, and the reveal was over. Now everyone was about to discover exactly why people feared Enzo Bellini. Serena had imagined discovering Enzo's secret differently. Actually, that was a lie. She had imagined several possibilities. Undercover police officer, private investigator, former soldier, very confused accountant, Mafia boss, had been somewhere near the bottom of the list. Now armed men were attacking the estate, and Serena suddenly missed the days when her biggest concern had been convincing Enzo not to die beside a flower bed. Bellini security moved instantly. Guests were taken inside, doors locked. Enzo became terrifyingly calm. That was what Serena noticed most. No panic, no wasted movement, no shouting unless necessary. He gave orders. People obeyed. The man who had spent days pretending to be invisible suddenly controlled every inch of the estate. Serena finally understood what she had sensed from the beginning. Authority. Enzo hadn't learned how to look powerful. He had learned how to hide it. The attack failed quickly. Russo had expected compromised security. Daniel Voss had been exposed before he could disable the estate's defenses. Within minutes, the surviving attackers retreated. But Adrian Russo had prepared another move. Serena disappeared. It happened inside the confusion. A staff member told her Enzo had ordered her moved through the west corridor. Serena followed. The staff member wasn't staff. By the time she realized, A cloth covered her mouth. The world vanished. Enzo discovered she was missing 7 minutes later. 7 minutes. Marco would remember that number for years, because it took 7 minutes for Enzo Bellini to transform from controlled anger into something none of his men wanted to stand near. A security camera showed Serena being taken through a delivery entrance. Vehicle identified, plate false, route east. Enzo didn't shout. That frightened everyone more. He walked into his office, removed the dirty gardening shirt, and changed into black. Marco watched. The gardener was gone, completely. Enzo strapped on his watch, his shoulder holster, his jacket, then looked at Serena's empty water glass sitting on the corner of his desk. He had kept it. That was ridiculous. He knew it. Didn't matter. Someone had taken the first person in years who had looked at Enzo Bellini and seen absolutely nothing useful. No money, no name, no empire, just a thirsty man. Russo had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought Serena mattered because Enzo wanted her. The truth was worse. Serena mattered because Enzo trusted her. Across the city, Serena woke inside an abandoned country club. Her head hurt. Her hands were tied. Her patience was worse. Adrian Russo eventually appeared. He was polished, elegant, pleasant. Serena disliked him immediately. Men who smiled too much while kidnapping people were exhausting. Russo wanted information. What had Enzo discovered? Where were the financial records? Which Bellini men remained loyal? Serena knew almost none of it. Apparently nobody had informed Russo that Enzo had spent most of their relationship discussing irrigation badly. Russo didn't find that funny. Serena did. That became a problem. He tried another approach. Enzo had lied to her, used her, watched her while pretending to be poor. Perhaps Serena should consider what kind of man did that. The words found their mark. Because Serena was angry. Enzo had lied. Repeatedly. He had let her worry. Let her think he was risking his life against men more powerful than him when, apparently, he was the powerful man. But anger was not betrayal. Serena understood the difference. Russo didn't. He assumed hurt people were automatically useful. That was probably why his organization had so many enemies. Serena began watching instead. Doors, windows, guards, phones. She had learned something from Enzo. Observe first. Move second. Unfortunately, Serena had also learned something from herself. Moving gracefully remained optional. Her first escape attempt ended when she bumped a metal bucket. The sound echoed through the corridor. Serena closed her eyes. Of course, kidnapped by organized criminals, betrayed by a bucket. She returned to her chair before the guard entered. He found her sitting innocently. The bucket lay several feet away. The guard looked at it, then at Serena. She shrugged. Apparently haunted country clubs had become a problem. He didn't believe her, but he also didn't discover the loosened rope behind her wrist. 20 minutes later, Serena tried again. This time, she succeeded. Enzo arrived just as the lights went out. Marco's men had cut external power. The Bellinis entered from 3 sides. Russo had expected Enzo to negotiate. Enzo had no interest. Serena heard shouting downstairs, then footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Familiar. She moved toward the corridor. A guard appeared. Serena swung the first available object. A decorative lamp. It broke beautifully. The guard did not. Unfortunate. He grabbed her wrist. Then someone appeared behind him. Enzo. The next few seconds were not gentle. Serena backed away. For the first time, she saw the version of Enzo people feared. Not rumor, not implication. Reality. He was efficient. Brutal when necessary. Controlled even in violence. And when it ended, Enzo looked at Serena. Everything in him changed. He crossed toward her. Stopped. Again. That hesitation. Serena recognized it now. He was waiting to see whether she feared him. Enzo Bellini. The man who had walked into a building full of armed enemies was afraid of Serena taking one step backward. She didn't. Serena stepped forward, then caught her shoe on the broken lamp cord. Of course she did. Enzo caught her. For one absurd second, they both stared at the cord. Then Serena started laughing. She couldn't help it. Terror, relief, exhaustion. The ridiculousness of nearly surviving a kidnapping, only to be defeated by electrical wiring. Enzo looked at her. Then a rough laugh escaped him. Marco entered. Saw them. Serena half falling in Enzo's arms. Broken lamp. Unconscious man. Both laughing. Marco turned around. Some things were above his salary. Enzo held Serena tighter. The laughter faded. She looked at him. Really looked. Clean black clothes now. No dirt. No disguise. This was Enzo Bellini. But the eyes were the same. Serena touched his face, then told him she was still angry. Enzo nodded. Fair. Very angry. Another nod. Also fair. She would probably remain angry tomorrow. Enzo said he would arrange his schedule. Serena stared, then laughed again. He carried her out. Serena objected that she could walk. Enzo looked at the broken lamp behind them. Serena reconsidered. Being carried suddenly seemed dignified. Russo's organization collapsed over the following 48 hours. Victor talked. Daniel talked faster. Accounts were frozen. Weapons seized. Men disappeared from positions of power. The Bellini betrayal ended. But Enzo's real problem remained. Serena. She returned to the estate and avoided him for an entire day. Enzo discovered that being ignored by Serena Bennett was significantly worse than being shot at by Adrian Russo. By evening, he found her in the garden. The same garden. The same flower bed. Serena stood where she had first given him water. Enzo approached. No guards. No suit jacket. No disguise. Just him. Serena looked at him and finally asked the question that had been waiting since the reveal. Why hadn't he told her? Enzo could have offered strategy, security, operational necessity. All true, none sufficient. So he gave her the real answer, because with Serena, he had liked being nobody. That answer ruined Serena's anger. Not completely. She had worked hard on that anger. She intended to keep at least some of it. But Enzo continued. For most of his adult life, people had reacted to his surname before they reacted to him. Men became respectful. Women became careful. Strangers became useful. Everyone wanted something. Money, protection, influence, access. Fear had become so normal that Enzo sometimes noticed its absence more than its presence. Then Serena walked across the garden carrying water. She didn't know his name, didn't know the house belonged to him, didn't know men had crossed cities to avoid insulting him. She looked at him and saw a man who needed a drink. Nothing more, nothing less. That had been rare enough to unsettle him. Serena listened. Enzo told her about the investigation, the stolen money, Victor, Daniel, why he had disguised himself, why he couldn't risk revealing himself once Serena discovered pieces of the truth. Then he admitted something Serena hadn't expected. He should have sent her away sooner, but he hadn't wanted to. There it was, not strategy, not mystery, selfishness. For once, Serena appreciated the honesty. She asked when he had realized he liked her. Enzo considered lying. Serena saw it. He abandoned the attempt. The water. Serena stared. The first glass? Enzo nodded. That was embarrassingly fast for a feared Mafia boss. He corrected her. Interested. Not in love, Serena asked when that happened. Enzo became quiet. Much better. Serena enjoyed watching him struggle. For several seconds, the great Enzo Bellini apparently found the roses fascinating. Then he admitted he didn't know. Maybe when she defended the waiter. Maybe when she followed him behind the hedge, despite having no survival instinct. Maybe when she bandaged his arm without demanding answers. Maybe when she made him laugh in an office, while both of them were hiding from Victor. Or maybe there had been no single moment. Maybe Serena had simply kept appearing. Until one day, Enzo realized he had started looking for her. That silenced her, because Serena understood exactly what he meant. She had done the same. The gardener had become part of her day before she realized she was waiting to see him. The water had become an excuse. The questions had become excuses. Even her suspicion had become an excuse to stay near him. Serena looked at the flower bed. The hydrangeas were recovering. Barely. She told Enzo that his gardening had almost killed them. Enzo claimed the soil was responsible. Serena laughed, still incapable of accepting responsibility. Some things apparently survived identity reveals. Over the next several weeks, Serena remained at Bellini Estate. Not because Enzo asked. At first, he didn't. That mattered. He gave her space. A car whenever she wanted to leave. Security that remained far enough away not to suffocate her. No expectation. No debt because he had rescued her. No assumption that surviving danger together automatically created romance. Serena noticed. So did everyone else. Especially Marco. The Bellini household had known Enzo for years. They knew his routines. 7 in the morning coffee. Meetings. Calls. Training. Business. Dinner if somebody reminded him. Sleep when absolutely necessary. Then Serena entered the routine. Suddenly there were breakfasts outside, walks through the garden, arguments about flowers. Enzo began carrying water. Marco noticed that first. One morning, he watched Enzo leave the house with 2 bottles. He said nothing. His face did. Enzo warned him. Marco remained wisely silent. Serena's presence changed the estate in smaller ways. She knew employees' names. She ate in the kitchen occasionally. She convinced the chef that dessert portions designed for wealthy women were unnecessarily depressing. She reorganized one of the charity events and increased donations. She also discovered Enzo had kept the original glass. That was perhaps the most embarrassing development in Bellini history. Serena found it inside his private office. Same plain glass, washed. Sitting on a shelf beside expensive awards and family photographs, she stared at it. Then at Enzo. He looked completely unapologetic. Serena asked whether the Mafia boss of Chicago had stolen a glass from his own catering company for sentimental reasons. Enzo pointed out that technically it belonged to him. That was not the point, Serena threatened to tell Marco. Enzo's expression changed. Finally, leverage. Their romance grew there. Not in dramatic declarations, in ordinary moments. Enzo bringing her coffee without asking. Serena correcting his terrible attempts at plant care. His hand finding the small of her back in crowded rooms. Her learning that the frightening Bellini silence sometimes simply meant he was tired. Enzo learning that Serena became quieter when hurt, not louder. He noticed the way certain women looked at her. The little judgments, the polished insults. One evening at a charity dinner, a woman complimented Serena's confidence for wearing a fitted dress. There was nothing technically rude about the sentence. That was the skill. Serena knew it. Enzo knew it too. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked at Serena afterward and told her she looked beautiful. No qualification. No bravery. No surprise. Beautiful. Serena's expression changed. Enzo noticed. Later, she told him about the former fiancé, a man who had spent years suggesting improvements. Different food, different clothes, different body. Always phrased as concern. Enzo listened. He didn't threaten the man. At least not aloud. Serena appreciated the restraint. She also noticed Marco quietly checking something on his phone afterward. Serena decided not to ask. Some mysteries were healthier unexplored. Enzo understood something that night. Serena's humor wasn't insecurity. It was survival. She had learned to laugh before other people could decide what was funny. But beneath it, there remained a woman who occasionally expected love to come with conditions. Enzo knew something about conditions. His world was full of them. So he made certain Serena received none from him. Months passed. The garden changed. The investigation became an old story. Victor and Daniel disappeared into legal proceedings and considerably less comfortable futures. Russo's power fractured. Bellini businesses stabilized. Life should have returned to normal. It didn't, because Enzo no longer wanted the old normal. One evening, he asked Serena to walk with him. She became suspicious immediately. Enzo had learned that Serena's suspicion was permanent. He accepted this. They crossed the lawn, past the pool, past the greenhouse, past the section where she had once followed him badly. Then they reached the flower bed. The original one. Serena stopped. A small table stood there. 2 glasses, 1 pitcher of water. Serena looked at Enzo, then at the table, then back at him. She asked whether this was romance or dehydration prevention. Enzo said both. Serena laughed. They sat. No champagne, no guests. No armed men visible, although Serena knew better now. Just water. Enzo poured her a glass, then his. For a while, neither spoke. The sun lowered behind the estate. Finally, Enzo told her something he had never said before. The day Serena approached him, he hadn't actually needed saving. Not physically. Serena's eyes narrowed. She had suspected as much. The man had clearly been dramatic. Enzo ignored that. He explained. He had gone undercover expecting to find betrayal, greed, cruelty. He had found all 3. For days, people had walked past him because they believed he had nothing to offer them. Then Serena stopped. It hadn't saved his life. It had reminded him there were still people who could do something good without first calculating its value. Serena became quiet. Enzo reached into his pocket. Her eyes immediately dropped to his hand. He noticed. A tiny smile appeared. Then he pulled out a key. Serena stared. Not a ring. A key. Enzo placed it in her palm. It opened the private garden entrance, his office, and the residential wing. Serena looked at him. Enzo told her he wasn't asking her to become part of his world, because she owed him anything. He wasn't even asking her to understand every part of it. He was asking whether she wanted a place in his life where she never had to earn the right to stay. Serena's throat tightened. She looked down at the key, then back at him. The man sitting across from her no longer resembled the dirty gardener from months earlier. Clean dark shirt, expensive watch, controlled posture. Everything about him announced power now. But Serena could still see him, the man in the dirt, the one who had looked surprised when somebody noticed he was thirsty. She accepted the key. Enzo exhaled. Serena noticed. Her eyes narrowed. Was Enzo Bellini nervous? No. He answered too quickly. Serena smiled. He absolutely was. That became one of her favorite discoveries. The relationship continued. So did the garden. Frank eventually retired. Before leaving, he informed Serena that Enzo had been the worst temporary gardener he'd employed in 40 years. Serena agreed. Enzo was standing 3 feet away. Neither cared. Frank also admitted he'd known something was wrong with Enzo from the beginning, because nobody dug irrigation trenches with a watch tan that expensive. Enzo looked offended. Serena laughed for nearly a minute. Months later, Bellini Estate hosted another summer party. Same lawn, same white umbrellas, same wealthy guests. But things felt different. Serena no longer moved through the gathering as someone expected to solve everyone else's problems quietly. She stood beside Enzo, not behind him, beside. People knew her now, some because of Enzo. Others because Serena had become deeply involved in the Bellini Charitable Foundation and proved irritatingly competent at it. The garden looked beautiful. Even the hydrangeas had survived. Enzo claimed partial credit. Serena refused. Near the middle of the afternoon, Serena noticed a young groundskeeper working near the far wall. The temperature had climbed. The man wiped sweat from his forehead. Serena picked up a glass of water. Before she could move, Enzo took it from her. Serena looked at him. He picked up another. Then together they crossed the lawn. The young gardener looked terrified when he realized Enzo Bellini was approaching. Enzo handed him the water. The man stared at it as though accepting might somehow violate a Mafia rule. Serena nearly laughed. Enzo told him to drink. He did. Immediately. Apparently Enzo had finally discovered one advantage to his reputation. People stayed hydrated. Serena looked at him. Enzo looked back. Neither needed to mention the first time. They remembered. The dirt, the heat, the glass, the lie, everything that followed. Later that evening, after the guests left, Serena found Enzo alone, near the same flower bed. He was looking at the roses. She approached from behind. Asked what he was doing. Enzo said he was inspecting them. Serena reminded him he knew absolutely nothing about roses. Enzo turned. Then told her he knew enough. Serena challenged him. He pointed toward one. Red. Then another. Also red. Serena stared. Enzo's expression remained completely serious. She laughed. He pulled her closer. For all his money, all his power, all the fear attached to the Bellini name, Serena's favorite version of Enzo remained the one almost nobody else had met. The man beneath everything. And Enzo's favorite thing about Serena remained just as simple. She had met him when she believed he had nothing. No mansion, no money, no armed men, no famous surname, nothing she could possibly gain. And she had chosen kindness anyway. People would later tell the story differently. Some said Serena Bennett had captured the attention of Enzo Bellini. Others said the Mafia boss had fallen for the curvy woman brave enough to approach him. A few exaggerated everything until the glass became crystal, the garden became a battlefield, and Enzo was apparently seconds from death when Serena saved him. Serena found that version particularly offensive. It had been dehydration, not open-heart surgery. But the truth was quieter, and much better. On a hot afternoon, dozens of people had looked toward a man sitting in the dirt, and seen a gardener. Serena Bennett had looked at the same man, and seen someone who might be thirsty. She had been the only one who stopped. She had been the only one who offered him water, and when the gardener finally stood up and revealed that he was Enzo Bellini, the most powerful thing he owned wasn't the mansion behind him. It wasn't the organization waiting for his command. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the fear attached to his name. It was the certainty that one woman had already chosen to care, before she knew who he was. And for a man who had spent most of his life wondering whether people respected Enzo, or simply feared Bellini, that glass of water had answered a question he hadn't even known he was asking. If Serena and Enzo's story kept you watching until the very end, show some love by hitting the like button and subscribing for more unforgettable Mafia romance stories filled with danger, suspense, unexpected humor, and powerful love. And before you go, tell me in the comments, would you have stopped to give the mysterious gardener water? Or would you have walked right past him like everyone else? Also, drop your country or city below. I'd love to see where everyone is watching from. And remember, sometimes the person the whole world overlooks is the one person you should have been paying attention to all along.